Hey there, Bob from Oregon's Constant Gardener. Welcome to the OCG Fam Show. It's day 3 of the remix episodes where we're taking episodes from the past that are specifically about using Nectar for the Gods and the step-by-step use of it. Not just some pie-in-the-sky theory, but actually step-by-step how to use it. And the first episode we did was me talking about Nectar for the Gods, going through the Spartan regimen. I'll show you that. And, how much you use, the philosophy, and actually getting into putting it into a bucket and pouring it on a plant. And then we got into stuff, the notes. pH is critical, start with good soil, and when in doubt, flush it out. And in the last episode, number 2, we covered those. pH is critical and start with good soil. And now, this episode today is a video we did where we talked about flushing. And flushing's a little different with Nectar for the Gods than you might think with your other indoor gardening type pursuits. So, interesting episode. Watch the video and then I'll talk to you after. So we got Scott here. We're talking about notes, and Scott told us about pH is critical, start with good soil, and when in doubt, flush it out briefly. Mostly,
it's a lot of things. Generally, most people, when they talk flush, they talk about preparing the plant for the end of the plant's life cycle, getting the fruit ready for...
that's the industry term.
That's the flush. I'm flushing, I'm reducing what's in the soil and the medium. Some people believe they're pulling out the salts and the heavy metals from the fruit and the plant. Mm-hmm. The goal is basically to get this root zone completely clean, washed out, so the plant's not absorbing any more nitrates, any more phosphates. They aren't turning the fruit harsh. So, the industry standard is 10 to 14 days. A lot of people in the industry just use water as a flushing agent.
You start seeing all the leaves yellowing out, the plant's using every
little bottom up. They're consuming themselves. There's a little cannibalism going on. They're defoliating as they go. That's a great, you've done it right if you get to that point where you hit fall. But, in reality, sometimes we don't get there.
But mechanics of the product of using Nectar for the Gods, there's some different things you do.
There is, because we call it ripening. We say flush for the standard of, that's what the industry, where, there is no time. You don't flush a pear tree, you don't flush an apple tree, you don't flush broccoli. More calcium phosphate, reducing the nitrates, reducing the potassium, basically in flush we want to see substantial runoff because we're trying to tie things up, push them away from the root zone.
Okay.
From that point on, we're just going to maintain the plant's health and life up until the day of harvest with bone meal, possibly Aphrodite's extraction, and the Olympus up, just to keep them not fed, but producing the last cells in the flower up until the last day of harvest.
Okay, but also we can have issues with, we look at our soil, we got weird pH, weird parts per million, and we're trying to deal with something like that, and that's a flush too. Where there's
should I feed this every other day? What schedule should I follow? And what most of the customers are telling us is they do a feed, and then a compost tea or an instant tea or a bottled micro. Then we go back to 2 more feeds, and then there's the Herculean flush. The Herculean flush in that span, that's only 6 waterings there. So you got the couple that are feeding the plant, 1 that's adding the microbes, a couple more feeding the plant, and then 1 that's just preventing any issues from happening.
Okay.
We're not skipping a feeding. We're offering the calcium still. They're still getting the calcium phosphate from the bone meal. You can throw Aphrodite's in as preventative. But what we're doing,
give it back to it in a fashion that it can handle.
Yeah, and that's the benefit of our flushing is that we're tying things up and turning them into organic compounds through chemistry.
They can be used at a later date instead of trying to just...
Oh, that's it. It all depends on your soil slurry tests. Depends on what type of flush you're doing.
Okay.
So I have 3 flushes. I've got a curative flush where my parts per million are 1,200 parts per million. My pH is 5.9. I need a cure flush.
Okay.
So I'm going to flush this to where I got 25-30% runoff. I'm going to flush it at a higher pH. So if it was at 5.7, I'm going to be up at like 6.4, 6.5, 6.6.
Going a little bit higher in the range. We want to stay within that 6.2, 6.8, but you're going to be higher up in that.
Yeah, buffering it.
Right. Okay.
And then for the parts per million, the salt buildup, I'm going to, at that 12 or 1,500, I'm going to put 2 tablespoons of Herculean because I'm looking for more reaction.
I got you.
Not only more reaction, because when you put in that much Herculean into a gallon, it drops the pH, which means we have to use more Olympus up, which is more limestone and more calcium, which is more agents to tie up more salt.
Okay.
So when I have super high parts per million, I'm going to add a lot of Herc, which means I have to add a lot more Olympus, which
Get you
means
to
I
get-
get a lot more calcium to do the work to tie up stuff.
So that hurt because you want a lot of it in there, but also just by that you're bringing it down to where you can bring it back up with your
Have to
Olympus
bring it
up to
back
get
up.
more Olympus up in there so that you got more buffer.
Worried about doing the slurry test because there's no sign of this plant that's telling me, hey, you know, you should be checking the slurry before you do this flush.
But it's just part of doing business.
Pretty much.
Okay.
And
And then there's the thing at the end that we already talked about.
which is the flush to the end
Okay.
for flavor, for finalizing the last of the oil production, for the last of the cell development, and the hardening off of the fruit.
Standard one, and they might be very different a little bit with the others, but this just gives someone an idea, actually seeing you how it's done.
Sure. Yep.
Hands-on. So let's do it. What do we do?
So we're gonna pretend this is our very first flush. We got 14 days left to harvest.
Okay.
Everything's looking beautiful. We get to the point where we're start our final flush stage.
Okay.
So on the initial final flush, what I like to do is I like to get at least 50% runoff off the bottom.
Oh, wow. Okay, so...
'Cause I want to lock it, I want to tie it, and I want to push it.
Okay.
Normally, I've got 6 plants in the trays, myself, much larger. Get it saturated, let the calcium start bonding. The second one will be to take a lot of that and push it from the root zone.
Time frame for that from the first, just like go all the way to
For
6.
my
and come
6
back to one?
plants, it takes, 10 minutes.
Okay.
10, 15 minutes total. Because I literally go through, when I'm done with the volume, the last one, I come back through and just hit it again. So,
Okay, well let's do it.
For the sake of this, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this tiny little girl tray and go with the big man tray. Because I like to add elevation. I'm using caps from my bottle. I put those underneath the pot, so when I'm doing my flush, anything that freely drains from here will not get reabsorbed in. Because there's everything we're trying to get rid of.
Well, that's what we wanted out. We don't want it to just suck back up again.
It won't mix this out. The slurry was perfect.
So yeah, no,
It was like
no left there.
6, it's 420 parts per million.
So we're just gonna pretend it's not that.
It's perfect. We're harvesting.
Okay.
So for this, I'm gonna go with I go on the higher side of these flushes. So I'm at the 30 mils. So being that's 2 gallons, I'm gonna go 60 mils on it, which is gonna take me all the way up to here. 60. All right, so that bone meal's in here now. Oh, it looks like we're at 5.5, so we got to bring it up almost a full point with the Olympus up here, pre-shaken. Go ahead and add a glob. Got that 6.4 range. All right. So now we're gonna go ahead and administer this to the.
It's exciting. Let me get a little administer.
All right. Boy, the downfall of these is gotta keep them stirred.
You know what you could do? You could get one of those hurricanes. If they were available, but they're not, right? You can't get one of those. Nobody has them.
Ah, he's taking pre-orders right now.
Really?
You bet. All right. Go ahead and fill it right up to this rim, basically. I mean, it's going to be a slow drain. At this point, I'd be going to my next pot. I'd be going to my next pot, my next pot. Kind of watching them. I also like to daydream, look at the flowers while it's draining.
Nice.
Once it gets to that last one, this one will have gotten to the bottom, or will have absorbed in.
You know what we could do? We could skip forward in time. Right now, doesn't it?
Why do I make fertilizer for a living? We could be selling those things.
We could get one of those little gambling books that tells what all the odds, all the sports were, or all the odds, all the scores.
And write
hover
hover
in there.
because I
and
didn't
let it
get
just
that
run out.
much runoff on the bottom. I mean, I only put in 1,000 mil. Trying to get it to where I'm giving it a really good healthy flush. This is going to go through, kind of look at its plant until it needs to be watered again. The next time I water, I'll just probably simplify with 6.4, 6.5, and then the next time I'm just going to water it, not
Just a normal
flush
water.
it. Yep, just enough to maybe see a little runoff, but I'm not trying to flush out everything again.
Sure.
This is my initial heavy-duty flush.
Water pouring through it. What, 20% or so comes out the bottom? Or?
For my final flush, that initial flush, I'm looking for, twice out.
Twice out.
I'm really trying to strip that so one time, and then from here on out, that's it. I'm not bothering with 5 times through flushing. I'm just trying to tie up this excess salts that were created during the growth process.
Beautiful. So that's a flush.
So far.
All right. Thank you. Much everything on the chart here. We're going to get into some more deep stuff later on, but this is just kind of the basics, the width and the breadth of actually the practical use of it. And we're going to do one more video in this series, and it's not going to be so much about nectar as it's going to be about SLF 100, because there's a lot of different products. You know, I don't see any here, but there's a lot of products that you can use with nectar that work very well with it and enhance its abilities. But among those, I would have to say that this is kind of the king of those, because it helps with making those nutrients in your soil available to your plant, doing all kinds of fun stuff. So we're going to talk about that in the next episode. That'll be tomorrow. So I hope you'll come back for that. I love you, and I'll see you then.